name is Monika Kinner, and I'm in my studio in Saskatoon, which is in Saskatchewan, Canada. I just want to acknowledge that I'm on Treaty 6 territory, homeland of Métis. We are on Indigenous territory. My mother was an artist, was a landscape artist, so I was raised by an artist. So that's how my story began, essentially. My mother couldn't sew. I always tell that part of my story. So I did not grow up with any embroidery or any stitching, any sewing. There was no needle and thread in my house, which is interesting. So I actually grew up and became a social worker, believe it or not. So I was never a part-time artist. I was always artistic and always around art, and I could always draw, but I never loved any mediums. I never enjoyed painting. I never enjoyed pottery. I never enjoyed the wet, sticky things, I guess you could say. Yeah, I grew up working with children and women in crisis is what I ended up doing. I became a mother at the age of 30, 35, and that's when I just had this innate desire to make sure my children had quilts. It was really important to me that my babies had baby quilts, and I don't know where that came from. Maybe that's biological now in our society and in humans, for how long women have made quilts for their children, right? Maybe. I decided to learn how to make quilts, and that's when I joined a quilt guild because I had no one to teach me how to do this. So I joined a quilt guild, and it was shortly after that is where I learned about art quilting, and I had never ever heard of art quilting before. I thought that artists were creative and couldn't sew because in my upbringing that's all I knew. Like, you only know what you know when you grow up, right? You're in your little family bubble or your own community, and so there's lots of artists in my family, and they didn't sew. There were people who could sew in my family, but they weren't artists. They always needed kits and patterns, right? And that's how they worked. The seamstresses and the cross stitchers and that kind of thing, they always worked by patterns. So I figured that the people who sewed were not creative. That's all I knew. I'm not saying that's true, but you understand what I'm saying. It was at that point when I discovered art quilting that it was like, it just broke everything that I knew to be true in that regards. It was just a light bulb went on for me. It was this eureka moment that nobody told me you could sew art. It just really just blew my mind, and everything, my whole world just opened up, and that's when I knew that was my calling. That's what I want to do. I think sewing is amazing, and I know I'm artistic, and I love the prairie. That's all I wanted to do was art of where I live, my landscape here. So it was just perfect. I've never looked back, and that's what I do.
How was it like to leave social work behind?
I don't really feel like I have, in a way, because a lot of my, becoming a mother is and working with other women and being home in community of women raising children is a lot of social work and crisis work. And I was working with children and helping women and children. So I'm still in the same community and always have been. And becoming a mother and being home with children is a bit of a vow of poverty, right? And it's a different lifestyle, raising children without paid work. It's unpaid labor. So that whole scene was very difficult. And like I said, I'd always been an artist and always been connected to the land in growing up in the country and at the lake with my mother. And I grew up in poverty as well. So being home with my children and choosing to raise them and homeschool them, that was a long, 10 or 15 years. So me stitching prairies, I started blogging in 2009, and I would photograph the prairies a lot, and I would put those online, my photos, and then I would show my process. This was long before Instagram and all the other more fast-paced social media. I would show my photos, and then I would show my work in progress on my blog, and then some woman would always say, if you finish that, I'm buying it. And that's sort of how the sustenance part of my career developed. And through that, I would get stories back from people. They would say, oh, like the feel-good part of my art really came up, which was why I went into social work, was to help people, right? So people started sharing a lot of stories of, oh, that reminds me of my childhood, or playing on my grandfather's farm, visiting my grandmother, or oh, I remember my parents' land, and just the memories the landscapes would stir up in people, and just all the sharing that came back and forth, or when people first came to Canada, post-war, a lot of the stories that came up was really beautiful that people would connect with. And then I would get commissions as well, old homesteads that people had lost just because no one could keep up the farms, and the places were abandoned. So they would send me photos and ask me to stitch it as gifts for their aging parents who were now in seniors' homes. And, so I was still helping people and making people happy. So there's something really fulfilling with that. So that just really developed. And as my children grew older and became more independent, my I want to say business, but that sounds so cold when it comes to art, right? But just my career grew as my children became less dependent on me. So it was a really good balance how things grew that way. So now a lot of my artwork too, I go out to work with people. I stitch in women's groups. I've done things with, like, I use art as therapy as well. I've done work with newcomers to Canada. I've done work with women's centers. Just having people stitch while they talk is just such a bonding thing for people as they're healing from whatever they're healing from, whether it's domestic violence or parenting in isolation. It's been such a wonderful gift to do this. So I feel like I haven't left social work, so to speak. Yeah, art is just so connected to healing.
Let's talk about the thread painting.
So that's what I started with first. And that was for me, an easy transition from the quilting. So the art quilting that I first learned about, tended to be fabric, and then there would be some stitching to embellish the fabric. And the more I did that with prairie scenes, and I'll hold up a photo of mine, if you don't mind, just to sort of explain, and I'll put it a little closer. But so in terms of colors of fabric, I would interpret this photograph of mine as a strip of blue fabric, a strip of yellow fabric, and a strip of green fabric if I was to turn this into an art quilt or a smaller wall piece, right? A quilt artist might, do a bit of quilting into the sky and maybe some lines through the yellow and then a little bit of embellishment in the green. And if you look closely, the green is full of grasses, and if you look, there's even colors of purples and flowers and some golden colored sort of wheat stalks, different leafy plants. And the more I looked at it, I just saw, like, to me, all those grasses looked like threads. So the more I fell in love with the foregrounds of pieces of my photos, all that stuff in the ditches, the more I thought it looked like threads. And so I just started filling more and more and more with threads. And that's where my work really began to transform from quilting to embroidery, is how I would describe it. The more I stitched in here and left my skies unstitched, the more the quilt batting in between became problematic for me, because this would be so packed down with stitches, and then this would be really puffy and lumpy, and it just wouldn't make sense. So I took the batting out, and it ended up just being a background stabilizer fabric and the top fabrics and lots of stitching. So it just became embroidery, really, and I would then I didn't fit in the quilt guilds anymore. So I did join the embroidery guilds in town, and that was wonderful because I love joining guilds, because those women hold so much knowledge, so much from way back, like the sort of the bare bones, original information to pass down on, proper threading and knotting and stitches, and just the real important basis of making something properly and it having longevity and folding up and all that kind of thing. So I really encourage, I'm going to give a little plug for guilds, whether you do welding or painting or watercolor or glass art, anything, like, join a guild, because they just have so much knowledge. When you learn the basis of stuff, you can go work with that and change it up how you want and make it your own. But learning the basics is just, there's so many teachers out there that have everything you need. And they love to teach. Like, they love it when they get new members wanting to learn. They really love it. So anyways, I just wanted to say that. But yeah, so the more I stitched, and so it's free motion. I do it with a sewing machine, my thread painting. And it's the same way quilters do their swirly quilting after they've pieced a quilt. So it goes through all layers. And basically the sewing machine is all disengaged. So the feed dogs that pull the fabric through are dropped, and the presser foot that pushes the fabric down is taken off. So it's just the needle running. That's all that's happening, is the needle running, and your foot controls the speed that the needle goes. So you're stepping on the gas essentially, and the needle goes either faster or slower. And I change the thread just like a painter would change their color of paint. And then my job is to catch the stitches where I want them. So often I'll even hold it sideways to get those threads, because the grasses all go this way. So I'll be catching my stitches this way underneath the needle, and it's almost like upside down drawing. So sometimes when I teach, I'll just stand there with a marker like this, and I'll give you a piece of paper and say, okay, draw your name underneath. Like, draw your name underneath the pen. And so it's really funny because everybody does a terrible, messy job, but it's learning, right? So you have to hold underneath the pen and try and draw your name. That's how I start teaching people how to do that. Imagine painting a landscape underneath a paintbrush and you're holding the canvas this way, right? That's how the thread painting works. So yeah, I have a really big one here if you want to see it. So usually I work quite small, like maybe this size. This is about, 4x6. Sometimes I like square because of Instagram. They got us working square so much. So sometimes I'll do 5x5, even 3x3. Tourists love to pick up little prairie scenes, and so you can see So you can see how when I stitch, I start at the top. So I'll build the tree lines, and I'll do some of the far fields, and just keep working forward. And once I get to the front, I'm stitching this way, and then I'll switch the green. So there's quite a lot of colors of green in there, and then I'll put in the purples, and almost stitch on the spot a lot, and then move over, stitch on the spot a lot. It's the same way you would draw it out, say, with a pencil crayon, like you can see the directions of the lines. So if you can imagine drawing that with a pencil crayon, following all the lines, that's how I do it with needle, like under the machine needle, basically. So this is, I don't go much bigger than this because this is quite large. And that's a lot of thread. And I'm going to hold it closer because I think that's so the sky fabric is not stitched. The sky is not stitched, it's fabric. It's almost too high up, isn't it? And then the lake is fabric as well. So it's dyed fabric, so wherever there's white, there's no dye. And then all the grasses, it was quite windy that day, so
you're taking a photograph and then you start from the photograph.
I take a lot of photographs, yeah. And I just print them out on my regular photocopy printer at home. And then I tape it up on the wall nearby so I can look back and forth while I'm working. Just because I make jokes to people and I make jokes to farmers. I say, I can't work plein air. I can't take my sewing machine out to a field. There's nowhere to plug in. So yeah, so that's, and then if I frame, I like to use non-glare glass. When I hang these in shows, people think there's no glass, but there is. It's quite nice to use non-glare. So
when did you start doing yarn painting?
So I got a provincial arts grant in 2015 because the more I hung around with painters and with my art, I was very adamant that this is art. A lot of times I don't know how it is where you live, but here, when I started, it was really hard to be recognized as an artist. Really hard to be recognized as an artist. Anytime I was I could get into craft fairs and craft sales, But people would say, "Oh, my grandma cross stitches. My grandma does this." But or I would get, "How long does that take?" And no one ever said, "Wow, what a beautiful composition. I love the light and shadows." Like no one ever said anything about the art, which is fine. But I would go to art shows and try to get my work into art shows, and I was always told, "No, that's not art. That's crafting. That's, go to the craft sales." And I'd be like, this is a $2,000 piece of art, this big one. Like, I'm not going to where they're selling, and I don't mean to sound stuck up or anything, but I'm not going to where they're selling Avon and Tupperware and putting. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is art. I want to be in the art shows, and I was very adamant that I'm an artist. The medium shouldn't matter. It shouldn't matter if I use oil paint or, like, it was so frustrating. Anyway, so my point is, sorry, I'll back up to answer your question. The more I looked at painters, the more I fell in love with how they could be impressionist. And I really felt that, like the piece I just showed you, is exactly what my photo looked like. It really is. Like I got to a point where I felt like I could really stitch what my photos look like. And that's great. Like there's, that looks just like my prairie photo. Exactly. So with the exception of the skies, because they're just sort of dyed. The dye falls where it is. But I put the threads exactly where they need to be and exactly the color that I want them to be. Exactly like the photo is. So I felt like there was no me in my art. And I really wanted to get some expression. That's one thing that I was always envious of with the painters. They could take big brushes with globby paint, which I didn't love painting, so I wasn't interested in painting. But they could like just put so much expression, and they could do these prairie scenes. And I just thought, oh, if only I could figure out how to do that with my what I love to do is stitch. So I got a grant to explore how to do that. And my idea, my pitch was to the Provincial Arts Board, was to try that to loosen up, was to sketch it out first and work with yarns. Because I thought if I hand stitch with big chunky yarns, there's no way I can be as meticulous as I'm sort of forced to with thread work. And they said yes, and they gave me the grant, and I got to, take some time away from what I had got myself worked up into, which was selling to pay the rent, to feed kids, right? Like I was in this, I have to keep making these thread paintings of canola fields because I have bills to pay. Like that's how it had worked too. So I had time to, it's wonderful to get an arts grant to have time to get creative again, because I had really not been creative, not the way I wanted to anyways. So that's where I would, and I'm going to show you some samples. So I have my photos, so there's up at the top, there's the river, and this is a beautiful fall scene of our river valley. And so for instance, what I started doing was using oil pastels, which I hate. I don't, the cheap ones, they're so gunky and sticky, and again, I'm not really into that, but it works. So I used them on black paper. And what I did was just some straight lines, because that's what stitches would look like, right? So I could do a whole bunch of working on that. And these are the crocuses, our first spring flowers. And there's the old grasses from last year after the snow is gone. So again, I can't be perfect because I only have 12 colors to work with, which was a great accident. So I only bought a cheap little set of craft store pastels, oil pastels. And the black is great because it just looks better on black than on white. And so I just kept working really simple from photographs. And then I put my photos away, totally away. And I only worked from these to do my yarn stitches. So this was my pattern. So I created my pattern, and it was really easy. So here's my yarns, and you can see, I hope, exactly how, like if I gave this to you and a piece of black background, it'd be pretty simple to figure out how to stitch it. I hope you could assume, right? And then it's just a matter of I spy, like maybe this would be the right one for some of the brighter greens, and then there's some darker ones, and I could, go through my yarn bins and find a some good oranges and just stitch them where they are. And they worked out so good. Like I was so happy. I'm like, I did it. I did some, you know, it was a really successful grant. So that's how I got into that. So this is a calendar that I made at the end of the year. So this is a ditch. And it worked. I'm so happy it worked. I just feel like it was really successful. This was the bottom of a little grove of aspen trees. And so I was so happy that I got to a point that I could say, I'm an impressionist artist now. So that's what the yarns were about, was trying to achieve that. This was good. This was a little abstract, but it worked. It has some French knots. And it felt so good to just, something about working with this dictated a little bit more. Like I had no choice but to let go and see what this would do. Every time I pulled the needle up, it was like, okay, I can't do it on purpose. It's going to do what it does. So that was really freeing for me to not be able to be so on purpose. Yeah. So it's slower, it's quieter. When I went back to doing some machine work, I was like, this is so loud. And it was like, yeah. So it's nice to be quiet, do the handwork. So yeah.
You're going in the field and take lots of pictures.
Lots.
How do you decide which picture is going to be your model?
That's probably about a quarter of the time spent making art, is just, maybe even more, is getting the pictures, but also just looking through them, right? Because I take so many photos, and sometimes too, I'll pick my favorites and print them, but then I'll get a little piece of mat. I don't have one handy, but when you take your little window and you go around and go, oh, I like this. And then you go here, oh, I like this. So, or a rectangle, and then you change it completely, and then you turn it this way, and then you get, I can get 20 compositions out of this one page. So that's a thing too, right? And I've done that. I've had my favorite one photo, and I'll use it over and over and over again, because maybe I like just this river piece with the orange underneath and the trees, so I keep my favorite ones and just do them over and over again, and nobody knows because, yeah, it's the mood I'm in, and sometimes it's interesting because I have my favorite photos that I've never stitched before, and I have binders full of them, sorted from, landscapes and seasons, and then also like ditches, like the closer up of the flowers. And I pulled out an old binder that was, because that's where I keep all these pages. I pulled one out that was dated 2014, like older. And I flipped through it and I thought, what did I see in that? Why did I take that picture? There's nothing there. So it's interesting how my eye has changed as well. Like if I haven't been out to take pictures for a couple of years, like through COVID, didn't go out much. I don't know, wasn't feeling very inspired. Sat on Instagram a lot, watching everyone else sell, and make all these online courses, and just, it felt like everyone else was productive except for me. So now I'm going out again, and I'm surprised that I'm finding so much inspiration. I really thought it would kind of be over, and I'm going out and going, wow, and I'm taking just as many pictures as I did in the very beginning, and that feels really exciting, actually. I wasn't expecting that. I'm like, I've been to this field so many times for 15 years, and I'm still squealing, going, oh, look at this flower, click, click, click. Like it's still working. I feel so good. Actually, this year I'm feeling really good. So
it is very cold in winter and very hot in summer. Also, the summers are not very long. So how many months can you actually go out and take pictures?
People say that it's not very long, but I think it is. I don't know why people say that. I think it's long. And I'm not a big fan of summer, so I like each of the 4 seasons quite equally. So I think they're pretty equal. I don't know. And I take pictures all year round. I've been taking pictures. We haven't even hit summer yet. I've been taking pictures for months. And winter is awesome. So every time a new season comes, it's a whole new palette. It's a whole new landscape, you know. So the first frost and winters are really, really sunny. Like we have one of the sunniest spots here, being in Saskatoon. So it's sunshine all winter, and the sun gets quite low. I have a south studio, so the sun goes like really high noon. The sun is only about that high, so it comes straight through. Sometimes it shines straight through the house and out the front door at noon. So I get lots of sunshine in the winter. I don't know. I don't find summer short.
You just wrapped up a show.
A couple, yeah. I wrapped up lots, but yeah. Oh, my pastel show. Yeah,
How was it?
it was good. It was good. It was a little bittersweet. I'll call it prairie portraits. It was landscape, and it was bittersweet because my mother was a landscape artist and she worked in soft pastel, and she never had a show in Saskatoon. I mean, that was also, you know, back in the day when we had two TV channels and you couldn't afford to call long distance to anywhere, and it was a long trip to come to Saskatoon, which was only an hour away. And we didn't have the internet, and you know, now I can look. I'm talking to you. Where are you, France? Right? Like, you know, this wasn't possible in the 70s and 80s and 90s, right? Like this was not possible. So for me to be able to go, you know, look at all my art, and you're on the other side of the planet, just that wasn't possible back then. So for me to have a show of pastels, just because I could just quickly email someone at the art store and he's like, I would love to have you. Yeah, sure. And it's just a done deal and you can have a show. Like it was so hard to have that happen for artists back in those days. You know, you'd have to drive to a city with all your art, show one guy your art, and then drive all the way back home and maybe wait for a phone call. Like it's just very different today. So, but I took one. My mother passed in 2020, and I have all the art that she had in her studio still remaining. So I took one of my favorites and I put it on an easel with a picture of me and her and a little story about her art and me finally picking up pastels. It was hard for me because every time I did, it looked like her work. It always looked like my mom's work, and I was like, well, it looks like I'm copying her. So I never bothered with their dry pastels, the chalk pastel, soft pastel. So, and after this, after working with oil pastels, which I don't enjoy working with, but they look great, I thought, these are fantastic. Maybe I could make art out of these, you know, like I thought there's sort of a style going on with these. They look like a series. Maybe this could be art, not just sketchbook drawings or plans. So I did pick out my soft pastels because I have a huge collection, and now I have my mother's as well. And I started trying to do the prairies, and I was like, oh, they look like mine. And people have said that, like, I see your hand in your soft pastels. They look like your stitched work. So that was this moment of, I did it. Like, people see me in my art. This was fantastic for me. So I did put my mother's art up with a story about that. And that was what I did for my artist talk at my show, was like, I can work with pastel now, and I love working with pastel. Maybe because it's dry. I don't know. Like I said, I don't like sticky things. But so this is a print of one of my pastels, and I think you might see that it looks like my work. Do you know what I'm saying? Like it looks like my yarn work, and it's also, you know, a place that I've thread painted as well, and it's a place that I've um, done with yarn. I've done this one in yarn a couple of times, but this is a pastel. So I think that's great that I can, you know, it doesn't matter what the medium is, people can see that it's mine. So back to one thing that I'd like to bring up about the textiles is I started a new Instagram page just for these because I thought, oh, my stitch, the people who love my textiles are going to stop following me if I put stuff that isn't textiles. You always have that social media pressure. And so I did that, and the people who know me as stitchers, one person said when they saw this and they saw that it was like a different medium, they said, "Oh, this was after 12 years." They said, "I didn't know you were an artist." And I thought, like that just that's how unrecognized textile art is. That it took me like over a decade of making art, and like what's honestly like what's the difference? I do this and they go, "Oh, I didn't know you were an artist." He didn't know. I just that just speaks volumes to how much more work we have to do to have fiber art recognized as an art medium. That I at first I was a little bit like offended, but then I'm like, no, that's your problem. But it's a huge issue, right? Because that's so much decades of work by so many, not just me, but other people too. Like, how is this art and this not art? So tell me that, right? I guess I still have things to prove. There's my social work side of me. I'm gonna I'm gonna make a difference.
Are you also teaching workshops?
I have. I'm not a lot this year. I haven't at all through COVID, which I mean everything stopped for 3 years, right? You can have art receptions, you couldn't do workshops with guilds. There was online, but that just doesn't work when you're doing little handwork. It wasn't great. And now this next year, I just got a grant again with a federal, like a Canada Council grant. So I'm kind of putting teaching on hold for a year because I'm doing another research and creation work. So it just started this month. So I'm pretty excited about that.
How do you choose your palette?
The prairie chooses it for me. Pretty much, yeah. And so that's wonderful, right? With the different seasons, I get orange and white and pink and purple and gold and green, of course. Yeah. When I go with my camera out on the prairie, I look for things to stitch. Like quite literally. I'm always thinking with the eye of a sewing machine or a needle.
Your entire art is truly praising Saskatchewan.
Yep. It is. I'm so passionate about it. So I think it's because for 10 years I lived away from the prairie, and that's part of what started it up. Is I was really homesick, and I wasn't expecting for that to happen. I had no idea I was so attached to the prairie. And maybe that, I was going to say my mother's fault. It's not a fault at all, but um, just growing up on the land and being raised by a landscape artist who was always outside saying, look at the land, look how far you can see, and look at the colors, and look at the light change. And we'd be sitting there having supper, and it would be sunny, and it would start raining. There'd be a rain shower. She would be, "Get outside," and we'd drop our forks and run around outside. She just always had us interacting with the prairie, and we were always picking her bouquets from the ditches, like just always looking for flowers and different flowers and making arrangements. And I don't know, just sitting there, just always on my swing. Had a great big swing set, and I just remember just watching. That was my TV, was watching the fields just move in the wind. And even now when I drive to another province, I love to drive those highways where you drive for 6 hours without turning. I love it. I always say it's my favorite TV show. I just sit there and watch the fields, like just watch the land and watch it move and watch the flowers go by in the ditches. Like it's just my favorite thing to do is watch the prairie. So when people it was so moving back was just like getting my soul back. It was, and I know that sounds like a ridiculous overstatement, but it really was like it was a homecoming for me. And when I told people I'm going back home, I can't wait, and everyone was, they could see that me, they could see that, they could see my reaction, and they would go, "Oh, that's so good. We're so happy for you. Where's home?" And when I told them where, I got people going like, "What? Why would you want to go there?" And some people laughed at me, and some people would be like, "That's the last place on earth I'd want to go, and there's nothing to see there. It's empty. Like, you poor thing." And it really hurt. It was awful. I can see her. Whoops! I can see her face. And so when I do talks about my art to people, I always say, it's like being told you have an ugly baby. It, like, how dare you say that about what's so important to me? Like, it really hurts. So when I started doing my art, it was almost like to spite people. Like, I'm going to prove to you this is pretty and beautiful, and I'm going to take your breath away. I'm going to show you, like, so, like, there is just so much beauty, and so when people say, on the blog I started back then, when people from all over would say, I had no idea there was anything beautiful there. It's like, yes, I did it. It feels like that, it's just the best feeling. Like, then I know I did something. My art spoke to someone, and because I'm glad you could sense that.
Have you ever thought of doing tapestry?
I have, but and I've done a bit of hooking. I've hooked some prairies, and I have a loom, a Saori loom. I've done some weaving, and I did a huge woven piece, and then I stitched into it, and it was gorgeous. Um, and it's sold. It's gone. I can't show it to you, but yeah, I just love fiber so much. I just haven't done a whole body of work of it. I mean, part of it is I dabbled in a bunch of different things through COVID, but I haven't stuck to anything in particular to make a whole bunch of pieces. So yeah, I'm not sure.
Have you done wearable art?
I did. So when I first joined the Quilt Guild, there was a national show, and everyone's like, you got to put something in. They were all bugging me, all these women. I was like the youngest one, and all these older women were all like, put something in. And I was just a little overwhelmed and terrified because I was a new quilter, and I'm like, they have this thing called the quilt police. It's kind of a joke, but you have to have it so perfect just to get in. Like, the stitches, you have to bury the knots and the tails, and they can't see any bobbin thread, and they go over everything with a white glove and turn it over to make sure the backs are perfect. Like, and too much pressure. As an artist, too much pressure. The back sides of mine look like garbage. I'm not, I I can't. The stitches, they measure the stitches. They have to be perfect. And when I'm doing my grasses, no, naturally they're not perfect. So, but then I looked at the categories, and one of them was wearable art. And I was like, what? I'd never heard of that. So this was all new to me. And just in my head, I was like, oh, could you imagine wearing the prairie? And so I took off with that idea, and I did it. And I went to the fabric store, and I bought a wedding dress pattern, and I made a wedding dress pattern. I actually did. There was boning, there was uh, hooks and eyes to do the back. It was a two-piece, and it had a train. I did my first zipper at the back of the skirt. Um, it was a strapless, so it was like a bustier kind of thing. And so what I did was I made these panels, and so it was a quilted blue sky, and then there was a strip of canola, like, so the rape fields, and I'd done yellow French knots all the way around it by hand, and then I thread painted all these green grasses around the tummy, and then the skirt was this brown crushed velvet, so that was supposed to be the mud, like the ground, the earth, and it had some sparkle and some gold in it, and a bit of, like, it was just really gorgeous. Yeah, and then the back laced up. So I had blue ribbon that trailed down, so that was like water. And it got into the national show. I actually got second place for it. So, yeah, that was really, So I did. I have a prairie dress, and I made it to fit me too. And I wanted to get a photo of me out in the field wearing it, but it's too small. I gained weight through COVID. So my goal someday is to make a spring dress and a fall dress because this one really looks like summer. And I have all the pieces actually here for a winter dress, and there's white silks and white taffeta and white cheesecloth and all these different types of snow and ice and crystals that I want to do like a whole winter dress. So I will someday if you dare me. So I guess I'm good at doing things on a dare and as challenges. That kind of fires me up and gets me going.
What about your children? How do they respond to their mom being an artist, being so artistic, being um, so, your personality is different from the 9 to 5 mom?
Well, I'm always working. That's one thing. Like 2 in the morning, I'm working. Um, it's good though, because I'm still cooking them hot breakfast, and my youngest now is 17, so he loves that. Right? Like they're not latchkey kids, so they appreciate that. And when I go out to the fields for photos, I'm always like, who wants to come with me? And they love that, so they love it. They love that part very much. Um, they're really proud of me, and I know the first time I was in a magazine, it was kind of funny. The first time I was published, and I showed them. They're so proud of me. It's pretty exciting. They go, "Mom, you're rich and famous," and I said, "No, just famous." And they laughed. So yeah, cute. But they're very artistic, and so I think they've learned. Just like it's nice to look back because I also see myself between generations. Right? I every time they say something to me, like I'm so glad we love nature because of you. Um, or I have to, or when it rains, my one kid has to run outside, and I always think, oh, I passed on what my mom gave to me. So it's kind of humbling that I'm really appreciative that I'm going to cry now. Happily though, like I guess my mom really, really instilled some things in me so strongly, and I know she got that from her mom, and I'm really appreciative that I couldn't help but pass it on. So I guess some women down up the line, passed it on so strongly to me that I passed it on to them. So it's not all me. It comes from a long line, I think. That's a good story. Yeah. Plus, if they need anything, the part of not being rich also is they're super creative, and I am, and I know that I got that from my mom too, and also her mom being escaping war and coming to Canada, being an immigrant, post-war immigrant, was like if you need something, you find it or you make it or you trade for it. Like just it's very resourceful, and part of my art is the same way. Like if I need more yarn or thread, it's like you just ask another woman and she's got some, or you trade stuff, or someone's cleaning out their sewing room, and just finding the right colors. Even it feels like I'm always doing a scavenger hunt in my sewing room. So it's nice to feel so resourceful. So yeah.
Your mother came from Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Did she expose you to German art?
No, not really. Well, no, no. She was little when she came, and she was always terrified to go back. Some of my older relatives talked about everything getting destroyed. Like the theaters and the libraries, and just how everything was destroyed um, during war. So my great uncle was an oil painter, and he was an artist in Germany. So there's some old footage of him doing art and portraits there. And his wife, her father. This is going way back. Her father was a puppeteer, They did marionettes. They did that kind of thing. And again, that was just all destroyed with war. Um, but she does the paper cutting, the black silhouettes with the tiny little scissors. I can't say the German word. It's hard. We sort of lost our language as well um, when they moved here. But yeah, so not a lot. Like, unfortunately, it's sad. Lost a lot of culture. Lost a lot of it. And part of that was when my mother married married another German person, because that's just sort of how it was. Like, oh, they understand the language. But then when I grew up, it was like, you're in Canada, you speak Canadian, and we weren't allowed any of our culture in the house. So we lost everything pretty much. So just, when I got older, I'm trying to get some stuff back and learn some stuff. But I have an older great cousin who tries to regain some of the culture that's lost, that's, pre-war, because there's so much rich culture, but it's hard because it's so connected to horrible things. So it's hard to dig through that. And a lot of people don't want to, because they always connect it with the bad stuff. So, but yeah, there is a lot. So, but no, I don't know. I don't know enough at all.
Well, I hope one day we'll go to Germany with your children.
Yeah. My mom never did. She's like, I never want to go back there. I never want to go back. Just bad memories. So, I mean, she was born in wartime and left when she was 7. So she only remembers the bad things, like a horrible place, right? Because it was just all destroyed. Yeah. And they escaped when they left. So she doesn't know anything. She doesn't remember anything flourishing. That's not how she ever lived there. So yeah.
I was wondering if we could continue with the themes. We've seen that your themes are the prairies, and you love each season equally.
Yeah.
However, your themes sometimes are, I can see you in the grass, or sometimes by a body of water.
Right.
Do you have a location that you prefer to go to?
Well, so I grew up at a lake. So some of these do have a lake, but Saskatchewan, our province, has a lot of water. A lot of water. We're a major destination for bird migration. So because of all our water, so all the melt off from the Rocky Mountains all the river systems come through the prairies and then go out to the Hudson Bay. So we have massive river systems, and I think Saskatchewan is known for 100,000 lakes. Like, everybody has a cabin. Everybody goes to the lake in the summers here. So there's we say the lake, but there's lots and lots of lakes. There's 20 minutes away in 3 directions we have beaches from my city here. So from my house, I can get to a beach. So that's something people who don't live here don't usually know. They just think it's farmland only, and it's not. So the northern half is forest, but I live through the grasslands and prairie grain belt. And yeah, just there's water everywhere. So there's usually rivers through it. My photos are taken. We're pretty lucky in our city. So I live in the biggest city in our province, and all of these photos I take, like this one, this is in the city. So I'm really lucky. Like, we have this huge area through the city called the Meewasin River Valley, and Meewasin is Cree for beautiful valley. And it's all protected. Well, hopefully stays that way. It's all natural lands, and some of it has been rejuvenated. If it has been dug up before, it's protected. There's a lot of natural plants, native plants that grow. So it's a great place to take photos. There's a lot of wildlife on both sides of the river, and there's walking paths. Like, we're really fortunate for how it's been stewarded and taken care of. So yeah, I don't have to go very far to get to prairie. Like, the prairie, our city's in the prairie, and the prairie is in the city here. So it's really wonderful. There's we're really lucky that way. So this new grant that I have is to is to make art a little closer in. So it's more, instead of the big broad vistas that I do, it's more about the plants and what's growing here on the land, and elevating the importance of the prairie, and its ecology. And like, I didn't actually know that the prairies were so important. I knew they were beautiful, and I knew I loved them, and that's why I do my art. But I'm learning that they're also important. So I just have never been a real science person that way. So it's really fascinating learning about how important they are. So that's what my whole next year, or this summer, is going to be about. And then the fall and winter and spring is going to be me making the art based on what I learned this summer with my research. So that's really exciting. I'm so surprised, and it's really validating too. It's like, oh wow, it's just an extra bonus to find out that something you love so much is important to the world. So it's that's exciting, you know? So the thing about textiles being seen as art, I think, is important. This grant that I'm, like, the new research that I'm doing, I think is going to be really big. Like, the art that I'm going to be doing is really to elevate the prairies, and this won't be art that's for sale. This will be bigger work that's going to be in galleries and museums that's going to tour. So it's going to be seen by more people, and it's going to draw more attention to the prairie landscape, because there is a landscape. It's not empty. That's the thing about this grant, is that this big open space is not empty. And they talk about how, even though you see just a few grasses and flowers, the root systems go down 10 or 20 feet into the earth. So when fires go through, it's still alive. Like, it doesn't kill the grasslands. They sprout up in a week or two, and it's all back in green. Like, one of the biggest benefits to working against the dramatic climate change in the world, they talk about it like an inverse rainforest, like it's all under the ground. It's quite fascinating. So to keep developing this land and turning it over and getting rid of it and building cities or creating more farmland on the last of the grasslands is really bad. It's also a habitat for birds, the bird populations. And yeah, it's like the worst thing you can do for global warming is get rid of the grassland. So they're like, yeah, if you want to do something about global warming, it's the swales and the bogs and the wetlands and the prairies. It would be a faster way than planting more trees. I'm just like, wow, I had no idea.
What motivates you?
The textures, the colors, definitely the textures. When I go out there and I see all the layers of the land, and then the foreground, like the textures in the foregrounds and the colors, and I can go out to the same place again and it's different. There's different colors in the distance, and the foreground's different, and it's more lush over here, and there's pops of color over there. And and especially with what I'm doing now, I'm forcing myself to go out to a few of the same spots, a few of the same parks, and I'm going once a week, and every time I go, it's different. Like, even if it's at the same time of day, it's different. And it's like, it changes so fast throughout one season. It's just seeing the plant life change is amazing. Like, the different stages, and like, I thought this was growing here just last week, and it's already gone to seed, and there's other stuff now. So it's fascinating watching this time lapse happen. It's always different. It's, like I said, it's my TV show. It's amazing. It's just this never ending inspiration. I think I want to start doing plein air though. If it weren't for all the mosquitoes and the heat and the and the wind. So yeah, that's why I take photos, bring them back. My papers, they lie flat and they stay on the table. Pretty windy out there. It really bothers me when I'm shut out or not included. So I actually am not a member of any textile art groups. They invite me all the time, but I'm like, yeah, but there's so many of you already. Like so I am part of. I'm the first Fibre artist in a long-standing art group here in the city. They've been together for 33 years now, and every spring there's a spring show and sale. It's a juried art group. There's a oil painter, acrylic, watercolor, there's abstract, there's portrait artists, there's and you have to be juried to get in. There's 12 of them, and I was the first Fibre artist to get in, and I'm very proud of that. So it's and it's nice to be the only textile artist. Everyone's different, which is wonderful to be a group like that because there's no competition. Like I'm the better painter, or we're all different. So when people come to our shows, they love it because it's not like everybody paints animals with watercolor. Like it's everybody's different, and they really the city really appreciates coming to our shows. We sell so much art, like they love it, and I get a lot of attention being the only textile artist too. Like I like that because in the textile circles, other people don't come to those shows. Only the textile artists go to the textile shows. The Fibre artists go to the Fibre festivals. The rug hookers go to the rug hooker shows. You know what I mean? The weavers go to the weaver shows. So when you have a thread painter at a painting show, people notice you. People are like, what is that? And half the time they don't know. They think it's just more pictures on the wall. So I usually bring my sewing machine and I put it on a little stand. So they go, why is there a sewing machine there? And then they come in. I go, this is all thread. Come see. And I haul them in, and they look and they're just like, what? And so I didn't know you could make art with thread. And I said, me neither. So I get them to come in and look. I do get a lot of attention. Not me. I don't do it for me. I do it for just to, like I said, prove that it doesn't matter what you make your art with. The medium doesn't matter. It's the prairies. Like it's a prairie landscape. It doesn't matter if it was made with candy wrappers. I pulled it off. It's a prairie landscape. You know what I mean? So the medium doesn't make you the artist. I feel like I'm saying things the wrong way. I was going to say I'm not interested in being part of a textile art group because I feel like it's still just its own little bubble. I want to break out of that so more people see it.